Hey guys, Alex here from Homeschool of Bel Air. On today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you guys what I use and how I teach cultural studies. If you're interested to find out more how I teach my kids about our culture, stay tuned. So I wanted to do this video just in time for Latin Heritage Month. Being that we are of Latin or Mexican American or Chicano or whatever you call yourself if you are part of this culture. So I do want to say that this video is probably going to be one of my only videos where I go a little bit more into my culture. I am going to talk about how I'm teaching my kids about our ancestors, how I'm teaching my kids about some of the struggles and just different things that our family has gone through. If this video is not for you, I would rather have you guys not make any rude comments, being that I am going to show you guys a few books that it might not be something you'd want to teach your kid, but it's definitely something that I want to teach mine. So before I go into the books, I do want to mention that I'm sure some of you guys know I am Mexican American. My parents were born in Mexico. They both migrated to the United States in the 60s, sometime in the 60s, and they struggled a lot, and it's something that for me growing up in a small barrio in Long Beach, California, I grew up with a lot of culture around me. I grew up around my family. We literally lived in a barrio that was in the middle of East Long Beach, and it's very traditional, very much in the sense where the apartment complex that I grew up in, my whole entire family lived in the same apartment complex. We didn't all live together, but we lived in the same apartment complex. It was my apartment, my grandparents' apartment. I had an aunt that lived in the middle apartment. I had another aunt that lived in the bottom apartment and another aunt that lived in the bottom apartment. So I grew up around my whole entire family. My grandma lived with me from the time I was born to the time I moved out at the age of 27. So it's I grew up very traditionally. I grew up super traditionally Mexican American, or whatever you want to call it. I know a lot of people call it Latin American, Chicano. I prefer Chicano, but it is what it is, and I think there's just different people call it differently. So I feel like in the last year with our new president, I feel like a lot of the things that have been going on in the news, just a lot of things that we hear about or we're hearing about recently, with the wall and all sorts of different things, and I don't want to get too political. I don't want to get political on my channel. I just want to mention that my kids were asking a lot of questions. My kids were asking a lot of questions. I think Vincent especially was coming up with a lot, like, well, what are we? Are we this? Are we that? You know, are we gonna have to go? You know, so it's just those types of questions that made me decide I need to do some kind of cultural studies in our homeschool so they can learn more about their culture, because they literally had no idea really what category they fell under. So I feel like if they just kind of learn about their heritage, they learn about their culture, they learn about the struggles of their family, I think they can better understand where we're coming from. So I decided to create Chicano studies in our homeschool, and this is something that we started last month. And the way that I'm doing Chicano studies in my homeschool is we have an array of books, but I'm focusing on one book a month. So this one book a month, and I am incorporating this with our Spanish. So I'm no longer doing really Spanish lessons. I am taking whatever Spanish vocabulary words are in these books, and I'm making them into our vocabulary words that we're learning for the whole entire month. And then I created little unit studies for each book, and I will get more into that in a second because I do have their books here, or how I'm doing it. One of the first things I do want to do is I want to talk about the books that I do to teach cultural studies or Chicano studies, how I like to call it. So again, some of these books might be too deep for some people. If it's something that interests you, you can definitely, most of the books that I got them used through thriftbooks.com. But I do feel like it's something that if you're growing up Latino, if you're growing up Mexican American, Chicano, whatever, it is stuff that I feel like your kids should somewhat know and have an understanding for. I think we do try to sugarcoat a lot of things for our young ones, but I think for the most part, when they start asking questions, I do think it's good to answer and have good answers for them. So I'm going to go ahead and start showing you some of the bilingual Chicano study books that I like to introduce to my kids and have them read. And like I said, we do unit studies, and I'll show you guys how I'm doing all of that in a second. So this is my Chicano Studies little book box, and it's pretty hefty. There's a lot of books in here, and there's more that I do want to get. I'm going to try to turn the camera just a little bit more so I can get more of a better shot. So my little book box here, I just called it my Chicano Studies book box. And most of these books are bilingual books. Most of them do have the Spanish and the English, so that when I read it to the kids, I am reading to them in English, but I am doing some parts in Spanish. And then whatever parts are in Spanish that I feel like are good vocabulary words, that is what I'm using for our Spanish lessons. And we focus on these vocabulary words pretty much the whole entire month. And we pretty much just do our Chicano studies, like the little unit studies, once a week. So that we do every Tuesday, and then we just focus on the vocabulary every Monday, Tuesday, or every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So we only do it 3 days a week. It's kind of hard to explain how I do it, but it's working out perfectly. So I do want to show you guys some of the books that I'm using. Now, I might not be able to give you exact details on every single book because there's a bunch of books in here that I haven't read yet, or we haven't gotten to. But the ones that I have read and the ones that I have not necessarily done unit studies on, because we've only done 2 so far, but there are some that we have already read. So I can give you as much information on those as I can, but like I said, I haven't read every single one of these books. So the first ones I'm going to start with are actually out here. I'll stick them in here actually. So one of the first books I want to show you guys is Who Was Cesar Chavez? This is part of the Who Was series. This book here, I don't believe we're going to get into too soon because it is a little bit more of a chapter book. I might do this as a read aloud once we get to our Cesar Chavez unit, which might not be till the beginning of the year. So yeah, so this is one book that I recommend. It's amazing. It teaches you all about Cesar Chavez. I also have from the Who Was series, I have Who Was Frida Kahlo. Frida Kahlo is an amazing Mexican artist. And this is someone that we actually have a portrait of in our living room. It broke, so we took it down, but we need to put it back up. So the kids know about Frida Kahlo from a young age because we've always had this portrait and we have books on her, so they've learned about her. We are going to be doing a unit study on her sometime probably in the beginning of the year as well. So this is an amazing book. This book here is more, this one's called Tortillitas para Mamá. This one is more of like nursery, Spanish nursery rhymes. And these are all actually traditional Mexican nursery rhymes. So they're really cute, and it's not gonna probably show you guys, but it's just like a bunch of little nursery rhymes, some that you would probably hear growing up in a Mexican-American household. But this one's really cute. This is something, the kids are aware of some of these because I do sing some of these to them. So that is a really cute book. The unit study that we're actually doing right now or working on is actually playing El Juego de Lotería. This is based on the traditional bingo game that if you're born, again, into a Latin American or Mexican American household, you're going to probably be familiar with this game. And this is, I don't know, oh yeah, I did bring it. It's basically this one here, and you have the bingo cards, and you use beans or frijoles to put down whenever you call a card. This is something, this is a unit study that we're working on right now, so I'll get a little bit more in depth in this once I show you guys our Chicano Studies notebooks. Another book that we're going to be doing a unit study on is, this is when we get into the Diego Rivera one, and this is another book. This one is by Janet Winter and Jonah Winter, and is more of the story. It goes more in depth into Diego Rivera from a child growing up in Mexico, and how he grew up doing art and always just having a big imagination. And then obviously it goes into, I don't know how deep it goes into his adulthood. Oh yeah, it goes into pretty far when he starts doing his murals. So that's another book that we use, or we're going to be using, I should say. This book here is by Carmen Lomas Garza, and this is called In My Family, or In Mi Familia, and it just kind of goes through things that you would probably see in a Latin household or Latin Chicano household. Just some of the different things that you would see, and it shows you the different traditions that you would have being brought up in this type of household. So this is a really cool book. My kids don't see a lot of these traditions, so I do like the fact that they can learn some of the things that I might have grown up with in this book. This book here is called La Cazuela that the farm Iron Maiden. This book is called La Cazuela that the farm maiden stirred. And this story is just a beautiful, colorful story about a farm maiden in her, just her trying to make rice pudding or arroz con leche. So all the different animals in the farm and the farmer and just everybody helping her to get all the ingredients together to make her arroz con leche or rice pudding. What I like about these books, and a lot of them have vocabulary glossaries at the back, and this is what I'm using for some of these books as my vocabulary words for when I do the unit studies. Some of these also have recipes that we get to do. So I'm pretty excited when we get to this one, when we do unit study on this one. My diary from here to there. This is a story about a migrant that had to leave her farm in Mexico and migrate to, I can't remember if it was Arizona or New Mexico. It might have been California. I haven't read this one yet, so I can't give you guys the exact. Oh yeah, she migrates to Los Angeles, and her family did spend a little time working in a farm as migrant workers. So it's basically just a story about her diary, and I'm excited to get into this one. The next one is a story about Tomas Rivera. Tomas Rivera was born in New Mexico, I believe, in Texas. Sorry, he lived in Texas, and he did, his family had to migrate. They were migrant workers. So he ended up, I think, in a town that he lived in. He found a library, and he became very intrigued with learning and just going to the library frequently. And he went from pretty much a migrant worker to a professor at a college. So it's just a story about him. So I'm excited about getting to that one too. This next one gets a little bit more, gets a little deeper, I guess I would say. It is used in a more metaphoric type of way, but it is about a rabbit that wants to cross the border and go to the north for work, to find work. And he gets a coyote or a coyote to help him cross the border. So as you guys can see, it's very much a metaphor for just people in Mexico or Central America or wherever crossing the border and getting a coyote. He does help him cross, but it does show how the coyote kind of turns against him and steals his stuff and almost wants to eat him. So it is something that a lot of people have gone through with the coyotes, where they steal their money. So it is a metaphor for the struggles that some people have gone through in crossing the border. And this is a story by Duncan. I can never pronounce his last name. Tanutio. Oh my God. Okay, I'm not even going to try to say his name. I love this author. I seriously want every single book by him, but I cannot pronounce his last name. So there you have it. Tonatui. I don't know. So Duncan, we'll just call him Duncan. So so this is a book by Duncan. So this is a pretty nice book. Another book that I have is Too Many Tamales. Now, Too Many Tamales is a story of a little Hispanic girl growing up, how a lot of us grew up for Christmas getting dressed up, getting to wear your mother's perfume. It was a very special occasion. You got to wear nice earrings, a beautiful dress. And what it comes down to is her wearing her mother's ring to turn some masa. And what happens is she loses the ring. She forgot she took it off, but I think she believes that it went into the masa and now it's in the tamales. So her and her cousins end up eating a bunch of tamales trying to find the ring. So it's a really funny book. This is one that we're probably going to do a unit study on around Christmas time, around December. The next book is Grandma and Me at the Flea Market. This is a story about, this is very dear to me because I grew up going to swap meets, is what we call them in California. And just going with my parents every Sunday, sometimes every Saturday. And it's just a story about a little boy going to the flea market with his grandmother and going to the shops and pretty much spending the day there at the flea market with his grandma. So this is a really colorful, really cute book. And this one is bilingual. So this one actually is written in both English and in Spanish. The next one is Chato's Kitchen. Chato's Kitchen, what I like about this one is that it's very, a lot of the story is written in slang. So you get, it's about a cat that is a gangster cat, and he is what they call it, the hippest cat in East LA. And he meets a family of mice, and he invites them over for dinner. And in the story, you think he's inviting them over for dinner as guests. And the mice end up agreeing to go for dinner because they think, oh, he's nice. He's inviting us over for dinner. And they ask if they can invite a friend because a friend's coming over to their house for dinner. And his friends, the mice's friend is named Chorizo, which chorizo is sausage or like Mexican sausage. So the mice, or the cat, thinks, you know, they're bringing over chorizo. They're bringing over Mexican sausage. So it's going to be an awesome, you know, dinner party. Well, Chorizo ends up being a dog, so the cat invites over another cat friend because they feel like they're going to feast on these mice. And, well, what ends up happening is that the mice show up with the dog, and of course the cats get scared, and they didn't realize that Chorizo was a dog. But at the end of the story, they end up having a really good dinner, and they realize that Chorizo is a really nice dog, and they actually become friends with the mice, and they actually have a nice dinner. So it's a really funny book. Again, this book has a lot of slang, so I kind of like that because I do want to introduce the kids to slang. Being that me and my husband were brought up with a lot of slang and speaking what is known as Spanglish, I feel like this book introduces a little bit of that. So I'm pretty excited about this book. The next book is I lost the cover. I don't know what happened to the cover for this one, but it's a Frida Kahlo book. So once we do a unit study on Frida Kahlo, we'll be able to get into this book. This is more of a picture book, but it goes into her story from childhood onto her adult life. And I'm excited about this one too once we get into that. Gathering the Sun is a alphabet book. So it's a Spanish alphabet book, but I like it because it is dedicated to Cesar Chavez. So a lot of the alphabet, the words that go with the letters have to do with farm workers and planting, and so it goes a little bit into that. So I think we're going to get into this book also once we do our unit study on Cesar Chavez. We'll be able to read this book as well. This book here is Separate is Never Equal. Again, this story is by one of my favorites, Duncan. I'm not going to say his name again. I'm going to just wreck it. And this story is actually the story about Silvia Mendez. Silvia Mendez was a Mexican, half Mexican, half Puerto Rican American. She was a civil rights activist. So this is just her struggle as a young kid and not being accepted in the schools, and how even though we hear a lot about segregation when it comes to African American, we don't talk a lot about the segregation that was going on with the Latinos in the United States. So this book taps in a little bit more into that, and how the schools were not just segregated with African Americans in the United States. They were also Mexicans were also segregated, and they weren't allowed to go to certain schools. They were this story goes into her moving to a different area, and her cousins, because they were lighter skinned, they were allowed to go to this school that was predominantly American. But then because they were darker skinned, they weren't allowed to go to the same school. So this is a very interesting book. I'm actually really excited to get into this book. And it's called, again, it's Separate is Never Equal. This is a story called Just a Minute. And this is a counting book, and it's a counting book that goes in Spanish, counting from 1 to 10. And it's actually a somewhat sad story. If you're born traditionally Latino or Chicano, there's stories that they tell where they pretty much tell you that there's stories that they tell almost like folk tales where death knocks on your door. It's pretty much your time to go. And so it's kind of a story taking up on that folk tale, where death comes to knock at the grandma's door, and she's busy prepping for a party. So everything, as soon as the Señor Muerte tells them, like, hey, it's time to go, the grandma tells them, like, oh, just give me a minute, I have to do this, or just give me a minute, I have to do this. And she's pretty much prepping for a birthday party for herself, and she invites all her grandchildren. And at the end, the Señor Calavera ends up giving her more time, because he sees that she's very much loved by her grandkids, and he ends up leaving her and pretty much tells her, I'll see you next year for your birthday again, because he had such a good time at the birthday party. So it's a really sweet story. This is one, I already created the unit study for this book. This is a book, unit study that we're going to be doing for the month of October. This is going to be our October book. And then we have Funny Bones. Funny Bones is actually the story of Posado, Guadalupe Posada. Guadalupe Posada is pretty much the man that created all of these Day of the Dead skeletons that we know of today. He's the artist that created those. So this book goes into his life, how he started, how he was brought up, how he started doing these prints. And this is going to be the unit study that we work on for November, the month of November. And I'm pretty excited about this one. This is very exciting. So yeah, so that is this book. Another book that I have, and this is going to be part of our Cesar Chavez unit study, Harvesting Hope. And this is pretty much a story about him. From childhood all the way to when he starts doing some of the protests and all that stuff that he's famous for. So that is another book that we read. This one here can be a little touchy. This is Encounter. This book is a book pretty much telling the story, I would say maybe from the standpoint of maybe more like the natives. And it tells the story of their first encounter with Christopher Columbus. And it's not a super positive one in the sense that it portrays the Europeans a little bit more serpent-like, which I feel the little boy, I'm trying to explain it so I don't offend anyone. The little boy had a dream, and he had a dream that this man was going to come and it was going to cause almost like, it was going to not be good, pretty much. And he's trying to warn his people, and his people, it shows how his people, which is a known fact that some of their people, they believed that there was going to be gods sent from the heavens. And when Christopher Columbus arrived with his people, they realized his skin was lighter. They didn't believe how this could be real. So they saw them almost as gods. And they were obviously tricked. And the little boy pretty much was trying to warn them the whole time not to go and not to follow the white man. And at the end, it's pretty much him saying, like, you know, now we sit here pretty much wearing their clothes, speaking their language, almost in regret. So I do like the story. I do like how you view it from a different point of view. So this is going to be something that we read sometime next year, because I do want to do a unit study on this book as well. Okay, so this is the first one that we did when it comes to our Chicano Studies unit studies. This is called What Can You Do with the Paleta? And this is just a really, again, colorful story about growing up in a barrio, and just the anticipation that you had as a child waiting for the popsicle man, or the paleta man. And just making hard decisions as to what flavor to buy. And this is something that I love, because I grew up in a barrio where we waited and waited for the paleta, and we always knew that he came right after school, and we would come home from school, do our homework, and then we would hear the bell. So I love the story. We did a whole unit study on this. We even got to go to a paleta shop, and we got paletas, and we got to pick the flavor, and it's a really cute book. Now the next one is What Can You Do with the Rebozo? Now this one just kind of goes into a rebozo or a shawl, and all the different ways that you can use a rebozo, and it goes into from dancing with one, to wearing one in your hair, to carrying your baby in one, and it just kind of shows you all the different things you can do with the rebozo. So I like this book. This is very cute. We haven't actually gotten into this one yet. Blue Frog. Blue Frog is actually goes more into an Aztec folktale about how chocolate was made, and you pretty much have two gods. One god that wants to be selfish and keep this tasty treasure, is what he calls it, to himself, and then the god of wind, which feels like this is so delicious, you got to share it with the natives. And he disguises himself as a blue frog and goes to the natives and tells them where the tree is, where they can get this delicious cocoa seed and harvest it, and how you can grind it and pretty much cook it or whatever you do with it, and make it into a bean and get delicious dessert out of it. And I like this one because it gives you a recipe on how to make Mexican hot chocolate. So that is this story. Again, it's called Blue Frog. This one here is again by Duncan, and this is called Dear Primo, or Dear Primo, or Dear Cousin. This is a story about two different cousins, one living more of an urban setting, more like I believe he lives in like New York City or something, and the other cousin lives in Mexico. And they write to each other, and they pretty much just tell each other how their life is different, and how it's the same. So how they do a lot of the same stuff, and just the contrast as to when they dance, you know, or some of the things that they do in the street. And then the one that lives in Mexico, how he does some of the, you know, his fun stuff, what his fun stuff is, how they celebrate parties, you know, and Halloween, and how here and for Halloween they do more of like the Dia de los Muertos, they do piñatas, where in the United States you do more dressing up and running around asking for candy. So it just kind of goes in just the differences in how they're being raised, and also some of the similarities. So this is a really cute book. We'll be doing a unit study on this book as well. This one I can't tell you too much about. I haven't read it yet. But again, this is more of a Aztec legend also, and it's more about, I want to say it's more on the sun god, and I believe the Lord of the Night. I need to read this book because I honestly have no idea yet. This is one of the more recent ones that I ordered, so I haven't really had a chance to really look through it. But I'm excited to get into this one and read it. So now I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how I'm doing the unit studies, and how we're learning more about these books, and how I'm incorporating into our Spanish. Okay, so this is how we're doing our Chicano studies. I created one of these binders for both my boys. Evelyn is not being incorporated in this just yet because I do feel like she's a little younger and she doesn't really have the attention span to sit through one whole lesson. We've tried and it just hasn't worked out. But this is something that I'm doing with both my boys. I'm just going to show you Vincent's because it's a little bit better put together. So the way that we do it is we focus on one story for the whole month. And I just kind of created a blank, almost like notebooking pages. And the way that we're doing it is, as we're going through the book, we're filling out our notebooking pages. So for instance, the first one is the book cover. So they get to draw the book cover. We have an area where we talk about the author of the book, the setting of the story, the genre, and we just kind of add it down at the bottom here, like little flaps. We also talk about the main character of the story and any other characters that we might have. He didn't get to complete this because he had used way too much glue and he just couldn't finish drawing. But we'll eventually come back to that. And then I created a few little printables to go with the story. So on this one here, because at the time we were learning, part of our vocabulary for this story was the different flavors, because it introduces some of the flavors in the story. So we did, I used some of the flavors as our vocabulary words. And so we got to match some of the flavors, the Spanish with the English. And then I also create for them coloring pages. So this is a coloring page that I created for them that they got to color. Then we also get to talk about vocabulary. So they got to write their vocabulary words. And if there's any kind of translation, then they write the translation at the bottom. So for instance, these are the flavors of the paletas, or the popsicles. So we have the vocabulary words, which is nuez, and then the translation with the pecans. So this is how we were doing it as far as vocabulary words. And like, again, we have flashcards that we go through pretty much every day to familiarize ourselves more with the Spanish word. And then for this one, we also get to do crafts. We got to do a paleta. And in the story, it talks about a paleta being in every color of a sarape, and a sarape is one of those Mexican blankets. So we did a craft where we made a paleta look like a Mexican sarape. So that was our craft for that story. And then we got to do a few vocabulary worksheets, and all these I kind of just created myself on PowerPoint. So this one was more of a vocabulary word worksheet. And then this one here was more of a reading comprehension one. And then part of our notebooking pages that I created for them, I did a what happened. So first what happened if there's any kind of conflict, and then what happened, and then the conclusion of the story. So that's another thing that we got to do. For this story, we also got to craft a Mexican sarape, and the kids got to make their own design. So that is Vincent's design. And then at the end here, one of the last pages for that story is what can you do with the paleta. And this is another craft, or not craft, but another worksheet that they got to do. In the story it says, you know, she says, ese es mi barrio, or that is my barrio. So I made the kids draw their own barrio, and what they like about their barrio. And Vincent obviously said that because we live close to our paleta shop, and we do. We live really close to a Mexican paleta shop here in town. And then at the end, we get to write your favorite part of the story, and then I allow them to rate the book. And as you guys can see, Vincent actually rated this book pretty high. So that is that one. Now, that is how we're doing our unit studies on our Chicano studies. And let me show you, we haven't completed this one yet, but this is the Loteria book. And this is the one that we're doing for this month, or the month of September. And we already have the characters down. We have the setting of the story, the genre. We already have all of that. This was the coloring page that I created for them for this story. And then, they also got to color a page of El Gallo, which is card number 1 of the Loteria game. And this is their vocabulary words for this story. And so as you guys can see, they have, as far as vocabulary goes, I just kind of find words in the story, like frijoles and pollo, tamales, things like that. And then we just translate them. And these are the Spanish words. And like, again, this is how we're including Spanish into our unit studies, is these are the words that we're focusing on for that month. And again, we haven't finished it yet, so we're barely at what happened. So first, and then the conflict, and then what happened, and then the conclusion. So the game, the book of La Loteria, is just a story about a boy that has to go to this little town in Mexico to hang out with his grandmother. And he doesn't really want to go because he doesn't really speak Spanish. But he's going to go for summer vacation, and the mom tells him, well, you guys will figure out how to communicate. And he ends up finding out that the grandma runs a little loteria stand at the flea market. And she's the one that calls the cards. And they make a deal that she's going to teach him all the words, pretty much all the words of the Loteria cards, and he's going to teach them to her in English, and they're just going to teach each other how to speak Spanish and English. And at the end of the story, he pretty much learns them all, and he doesn't want to go back home. He actually wants to stay with his grandmother, and obviously he has to go back because he has to go back to school. But it's a really sweet story. I forgot I didn't give you guys details on this story, but this is a really good story. So this is the one that this is a unit study that we're doing now. I'm going to show you guys some of the other activities that we have coming up for this story, since I already have them. So one of the things that we do get to do is the kids and I, after each lesson, we get to play Loteria. So we go ahead and include a game of Loteria after each lesson. And we are using the Loteria cards as some of our vocabulary words. So these are some of the upcoming activities that we have for the Loteria book. I'm going to allow the kids to create their own Loteria card. So on this one here, they get to make their own, design their own, and just kind of draw out their own card. So that's one. I also have a reading comprehension page that I made for them. And then a vocabulary one that they get to do as well. And then obviously their favorite part of the story, and then they get to rate the story. So again, this is something that we get to do today at some point. We just haven't had a chance to do it, but this is part of our Chicano studies, and that's how we're doing it. So for every one of those books that you guys saw, I'm going to try to do one of these 4. And even if I can come up with worksheets and activities for, we're at least going to fill out our notebooking pages, because I feel like that at least allows them to draw their favorite part of the story, the book cover, and they still get a few little activities in. So this is how we're doing our cultural or Chicano studies in our homeschool. All right, guys, so that is what I have for you guys for today. Again, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.